$50,000. That's what they said I owed. All because I'd been barbecuing on land my family has owned for generations. One sunny July morning, instead of the smell of hickory smoke drawing neighbors to my backyard like it had for 15 years, I got the HOA president, Veronica Clark, striding up my driveway like she owned the place. She handed me an official notice saying my monthly barbecues were trespassing on community property and that I was being fined $5,000 for each violation. And just as I'm reading it, sirens start coming up the road because she'd also called the sheriff. Now, I'm not exactly the type to tangle with HOAs. I'm 62, a retired firefighter from Montana, widowed, living in the lakefront house my dad left me. I keep to myself, mow my lawn, help neighbors jumpstart their cars, and host these barbecues so folks can come together. But that morning, I realized this wasn't about noise or smoke. This was a setup. My neighbors were avoiding me. My mailbox had been smashed weeks earlier, and Veronica, polished black suit, sharp smile, had been circling like she'd been planning this for months. Sheriff Tom Henley, an old friend, stepped out of his cruiser looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. And then my daughter Emily, an investigative reporter, showed up with her phone recording. Veronica rattled off HOA guidelines, but Emily went straight for the jugular, asking exactly what rulebook gave them control over my property. While Tom was handing me a citation, Emily was live streaming, and within minutes thousands of people were watching, questioning how a retired firefighter could owe $50,000 for hosting neighborhood cookouts. That's when Dorothy Hale, a 75-year-old neighbor who's been around longer than most of the houses here, marched up and called Veronica out in front of everyone. She reminded her that my family had been here before there was an HOA, before there was even a lake. Tom later pulled me aside and hinted that Veronica had been digging into property records. Emily and I went to the county archives the next morning, and what we found started to blow the lid off everything. Veronica had been buying up lakefront lots through shell companies, paying way over market price, and mine was the last piece she needed. Then Pete at the archives pulled out my dad's old survey maps from 1962. Turns out, our land extends farther into the lake than I'd ever known, thanks to a conservation easement created when the state flooded the valley. And buried in my dad's old papers, we found a cassette tape, a 1965 state water rights meeting, where he spoke about a perpetual stewardship agreement protecting the lake from commercial development. Emily's law school friend confirmed it. Our property predates the HOA and is exempt from their rules. In fact, my barbecues were fulfilling a legal obligation to the community. When Veronica found out we were digging, she went nuclear. Professional PR firms smeared me online, edited security footage to make me look like a predator, and even sent environmental inspectors to accuse me of polluting the lake I was legally bound to protect. Then Emily traced her funding back to Mountain Gaming Enterprises, a casino company, and the picture became clear. She wanted to turn Clearwater Lake into a resort. The turning point came with a late-night call from David Brennan, a former HOA board member, who handed us proof of bribery, vote rigging, and her ties to the casino money. So we planned our counterattack, the biggest barbecue this community had ever seen, scheduled right during her emergency HOA meeting. We invited reporters, environmental officials, tribal leaders, veterans, anyone who believed in protecting the lake. The day of, my yard was packed. Dorothy wore a t-shirt saying, "I survived Jack's barbecue." Firefighters showed up in dress uniforms, and Chief Robert Crow Feather opened with a blessing. I took the mic and announced, to the cheers of hundreds, that my family held legal stewardship over Clearwater Lake. And right on cue, Veronica marched in with bodyguards, barking into a megaphone. That's when I introduced her to the FBI agent who'd been waiting, warrant in hand. The crowd erupted as they led her away. The casino project died that day. The HOA dropped the fines, and for the first time in months, neighbors lingered on my dock again. Kids splashed in the shallows, and Dorothy laughed with her friends. Emily's live stream reached 200,000 viewers, and the story went national. The governor invited me to join the State Parks Advisory Board. Marcus the lawyer filed a countersuit that paid my legal fees and damages, and the Attorney General formed a task force to stop predatory development statewide. Now, our monthly barbecue has turned into the Clearwater Heritage Festival, celebrating conservation, community, and the fact that sometimes a bunch of regular folks can take down a corporate land grab. Veronica's serving federal time, the casino's been banned from Montana, and my father's careful planning still protects this lake. And me? I'm still here, tongs in hand. Smoke curling into a sky that feels a little freer. So let me ask you, if someone tried to take what your family built, would you fight back or walk away? Because I've learned one thing. The only way to keep what's worth protecting is to stand your ground and make some noise, even if it smells like brisket. 3 months after Veronica's arrest. You'd think life would have gone back to quiet. You know, lazy afternoons on the dock, the smell of ribs in the smoker. Maybe a cold beer while the loons called across the lake. But that's not how things work when you've embarrassed people with money and influence. It started small. A few anonymous letters about how the Clearwater Heritage Festival was attracting the wrong crowd. Someone complaining to the county that the smoke from my smoker violated air quality standards. Little jabs, meant to make me wonder if winning had just painted a target on my back. I've been around long enough to know when a storm's building. And this one had that same heavy air I remembered from my firefighting days right before a wildfire jumped a ridge. Emily wasn't buying the idea of paranoid old dad. She'd already moved a good chunk of her reporting base out here, saying she could work just as easily from the lake as the newsroom. But I knew part of it was because she didn't trust whatever shadows still lingered around Veronica's mess. One night she sat across from me at the kitchen table, laptop open, and said, "Dad, this isn't over. Some of the same shell companies Veronica used are still buying property. Only now they've switched names." And sure enough, when she pulled the records, I saw it. Different LLCs. Different mailing addresses, but the same lawyer signatures, same wiring bank in Nevada. It was like watching weeds sprout back up after you thought you'd burned the field clean. Then came the call from Governor Martinez's office. Not a friendly, "How's the board going?" call, but a heads up. Someone had filed a petition challenging the legality of our stewardship agreement. The wording was slippery, not a direct attack, more like reviewing compliance. I'd been through enough to know review was political code for, let's see if we can chip away at this until you give up. So I called Dorothy. She answered like she'd been waiting for me. "Jack, honey, you ever play whack-a-mole at the county fair? That's all this is. You keep the hammer ready and you don't get tired. That woman has a way of making you laugh, even when you're staring down trouble." We decided to make the next Heritage Festival bigger, not just as a celebration, but as a statement. Chief Crow Feather brought tribal council members from 3 reservations, each with their own history of fighting to protect land from development. The festival grounds turned into a living history exhibit, drumming circles, environmental workshops, kids learning how to fish from the dock my father built. We didn't just feed people. We reminded them why this place mattered. But the real twist came when a man I didn't recognize walked up while I was tending the brisket. Tall, wiry, wearing a ball cap low over his eyes. He said quietly, "You don't know me, Mr. Morrison, but I used to work security for Mountain Gaming. There's something you should see." And just like that, he slid an envelope onto the table between the ribs and the cornbread. Inside were photocopies, internal memos, payment records, even email printouts, proving the casino company had kept their Clearwater Lake plans alive, just moving the proposed site a few miles downriver onto land with weaker protections. It wasn't over. They'd just shifted the battlefield. When I showed Emily, she got that same look she had the morning Veronica first showed up, the one that says, "This is going to get messy, but I'm ready." And I realized something. I wasn't just protecting my land anymore. This fight had turned into something bigger than me, bigger than Clearwater. And standing there on the dock, the evening sun turning the lake into a sheet of molten gold, I knew one thing for certain. If they thought I was done after the barbecue, they had no idea who they were dealing with. So, what do you think? Should I tell you exactly what we did next? How a lakeside barbecue turned into the opening move of a statewide battle? You might want to grab a plate, because it gets spicy.